So this is episode with Amanda Weisner Groff. This is the show Global Learning Journeys, Enriching Educators Through Learning Abroad. And your episode that you're on is actually the first episode where I get to introduce an amazing individual like yourself, teaching beyond borders. And I'll introduce you a little bit. You're currently a Ph.D. candidate at St. Louis University in educational leadership. You've defended your dissertation proposal and passed with distinction, which is amazing. I can definitely attest
Thank
to,
you.
yeah, which I could definitely attest to the struggle it is to even get to that point. And now you're conducting your data collection and preparing for analysis. You also have experience around the globe as an educator, a trainer, a curriculum and content developer. And you're also passionate about learning and development, organizational leadership, project management, and you also have strong collaborative systems for organizational success. And let's see, and then you also enjoy thriving environments where you get to challenge yourself and you have opportunities to learn new skills and perspectives where you feel a sense of purpose and contribution to the organization's vision and mission, which is beautiful.
Thank you.
So I think that's a great way to describe you. We've been very
Thank you.
fortunate to discuss and talk about education and traveling, and it's
Yes.
which is wonderful. It's nice to connect with someone, and especially you're on the other side of the world, pretty much from me.
I know.
Our time zones are different, but we are still connecting, and I feel very motivated when I speak to you about education and traveling. So I'm going to kind of start you off with one of the questions ahead of time.
Okay.
So of course, I want you to introduce yourself and share a bit about your background in education and where did your teaching journey begin?
Well, I would say it started pretty early on. I mean, I wanted to be a teacher from a young age, but I truly feel like I have to give credit to my 8th grade ELA teacher, Mr. Barry Johns. I'm from Canada, so I have to shout out the fact that he and my 9th grade social studies teacher were amazing hockey players. So they were known as like the hockey players, really, really cool guys, like the really cool teachers. But when he wasn't making us analyze Bee Gees songs, one in particular was called You Win Again, and Nicholas Zare, who was a student in my class, called it elevator music and just absolutely crushed the teacher for the rest of the year on that one. But Mr. Johns had a student teacher one time, and I struggled as a student, and so I still do as a student. Currently, as a student, PhD student, I'm preparing to defend in November. So right now I finished the very last of my data collection I'm going to defend, and I still struggle. And so I kind of got myself used to the idea that I'm just not into learning. Learning is just not for me. My brain just doesn't want to accept information. And he and the student teacher introduced a poem, The Walrus and the Carpenter, from Alice Through the Looking Glass, and partnered us up and said you had to memorize a stanza with your partner and recite it to the class. And I remember thinking, and I got partnered up with someone who had been like a bully. And I remember thinking, I'm just going to do both of our parts and help as much as I can. And it came very easily. And they recognized that. And I remember he had told me if I could remember and recite the whole poem the next day, I would get extra points on my term grade. Now, ELA was the only class I ever did enjoy because I read so often. And so I went home determined, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it felt nice to be recognized and acknowledged that, hey, you're really good at remembering stuff the way you see it on the page. And it was one of those first times that I had this impressionable memory of being told I was good at something academically, and then being told, hey, we're going to use this, and you can use this in other places, right? Like, and kind of showing me how I could transfer those skills over and use them in areas where I was weaker academically, and then kind of just recognizing me and taking something that wasn't even part of a plan, but giving me that moment to kind of shine when I never usually had an opportunity to shine. And I did go home, and that was probably the most I had really exerted myself to really want to try and show that I could do this. And I did. and memorized it and recited it the next day. And I remember him being so excited and so proud, and my dad being so excited and so proud. And it was almost like this little switch went off. And in my head, I thought, like, I knew I wanted to be a teacher for different reasons. One being I wanted a metal chalk holder. But to me, I was like, now that's kind of my reason why I want to be the person that does that for students, that shows them, like, you may not have, this whole well-rounded way of learning and you can just automatically do everything and it comes naturally and easily, and every concept you can just grasp immediately. I wanted to be the person that could show students that you could be struggling, but guess what? You do have these amazing gifts and skills. We're just going to identify them and see how we can apply them and give you opportunities to shine and succeed. And so I just, every time forward when I would see him, that he remembered. And so this is decades later, like 3 decades later, and I still recite that poem and can still memorize it. And I make sure to memorize it in case I ever can see him, even though I haven't been home in like 7 years. But that is the thing. And so I took that as almost a teaching philosophy for myself, was to find the gifts and the strengths of students and use those gifts and strengths to hone in on any areas of weakness or doubt or insecurity that they have, to teach them that they have what it takes to succeed, and show them that they're worth that effort of looking and finding and seeing what they're great at and then succeeding. So
what I love about
got into it.
what I love about that too is that you mentioned that he evoked emotional response. Where
Yes.
and obviously we know as educators that evoking that emotional response is so important to remember things in general.
Yeah.
So if a teacher connects with the students, usually through an emotional response. If that teacher makes you feel good when you come to that class, you might remember something a little bit easier. So yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah,
I
agree. I mean, I know for myself that, I joked earlier saying, a student from last year, a student emailed me just this morning, I miss you. Like, can you please give me your number so we can connect? And, I would tease her all the time, needing a break from reading and, find those opportunities for her to do that. But when the students would tease me a lot and be like, oh, mother, are you mother? And I know this is like an internet trend for, Taylor Swift or whoever else is mother of the moment, but they did know when they were like, oh, it's not just because she's the old teacher. It's because she really does care about us and she loves us and she wants to take care of us and so on. And that does go down to that moment. The speeches, as they would like to say, oh, Mrs. Groff is giving us a speech again. It was because I was like, you guys, and I told them verbatim, you may not remember this in 5 minutes, you may not remember this in a year, and it may take 5 years or it may take 10 years, but you will remember these conversations that we have, because you'll know that my words are aligning, to the actions that I'm taking in class to show you how much I care about you and I believe in you and I want you to succeed and I want you to see what you're so great at. Even if you can't stand the class I'm teaching, I want you to see that you're so great at something in my class. Even if you can't stand what we're doing, I still want you to see, I believe in you and you're doing fantastic and I appreciate you and, value you. I want you to know that you have that from someone, even if you feel like you don't have it anywhere else. And that was something that I can think of from the teachers that I had that made an impression on me. It was they could be the most nonchalant teacher that other people were like, oh, they don't care, or they don't this, or don't that, or don't this. But it was those teachers that were silly or funny, but it was the teachers that were just themselves and were just kind of unabashedly themselves and genuine. And that was what made an impression. So that's just always been my goal, is to be genuine and care. And yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, so that kind of like leads into my second question of, what motivated or inspired you to consider teaching and learning beyond your home, your borders, your home borders country. So that's something I would love to hear about too. What made you leave where you're from?
It was hard. I'll be honest, it was hard. I didn't, I was asked recently from some folks at the international program here at University of Hawaii. They said, oh, I'm going to, make an assumption that you traveled a lot growing up, with your family. And I told them, no, I never actually did. The traveling that I did growing up, I was raised mainly by my dad with my sister, and, still had my mother in my life, but was raised by my dad. And we did not have the means for that. The traveling that we did, and we fortunately got to go to the States, was for me to do majorettes horribly, but I wanted to do that so I could chill with my best friend. And so I would go to Maine, and I remember going to Notre Dame, and I actually met Lou Holtz, and that was like the highlight of our lives, was raising money to twirl a baton and go to America as a young teen. But we never did travel. However, where I grew up from the East Coast, I'm an Easterner like you are. And so it was very diverse where I grew up. And I just always had this goal that I wanted to travel and teach. And that initially started with me wanting to go to like Costa Rica or Guatemala. This is going to sound like the most probably ignorant or silly thing ever, but we all had to learn French in school. And so I never felt like I learned it, to the point of being completely fluent, but I could, you get by. But when I went to university, we call it only pretty much university when you go to get your degree, I was like, I really want to learn Spanish. And so that was just deadpan set. I want to learn Spanish. I want to do teaching as a second language. And it just really stemmed from, I want to be able to travel and I want to go. I don't want to limit myself. And it was honestly from me having these amazingly like diverse and unique teachers that just constantly fed me the idea that I was capable of so much. I remember like my English teacher. I remember I had this sociology teacher, Mr. Blair Abbas, and he was just like the most unique, like yogi, like traveling, just awesome person. And that's what made me want to do it. Is I was like, I want to have these experiences so that I can come back as a teacher and then I can tell students about these and I can help people have an open mind, and I'm not going to be sheltered. I don't want to ever be closed-minded. And even now at the age of like 44, I still find from traveling, I catch myself going, oh my gosh, like 10 years ago, even while in Germany, I had a closed mindset about this or that. Like, I'm so glad that I continue to have these experiences, but that was what really did it for me. And then, this is horrible, the movie Fools Rush In with Salma Hayek, I had just was like hearing her speak the language, and I was just seeing that to me, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then that was when I was like, I want to go to the Grand Canyon, then I want to go and learn this culture. That was what did it to me. Was sounds silly, but I know sometimes that's what says for people they want to go to America, right? That was me saying, I want to, watching that, saying, I want to learn Spanish. Like, this culture is so beautiful, and these people are so beautiful, and just the family and the way they looked at family, it just everything, I was infatuated with it. And that's what started it. And so I wanted to go to Guatemala or Costa Rica, and I just was like, put me wherever I can go to open up my mind and teach me what I can learn and immerse me in a different culture with this beautiful language. And that was what started it. And so that was why when I did take the initial training to teach English as a second language, even though all of the experiences were mostly in Asia, I was the sole person that was like, who can you set me up with to teach and practice with, where I'm practicing Spanish and so on. And so that was where it started.
Wow.
Long answer. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
no, that's great. No, honestly, I mean, that kind of leads into like, tell us more about your teaching experiences abroad. I also want to know about, your teaching philosophy and how it's evolved, and how you ventured into cross-cultural teaching environments.
Right. So stemming from that, so as I had mentioned, that was where my goal was for teaching in those locations. And oddly enough, as I had mentioned, since there wasn't this many opportunities presenting themselves, I did have a couple and they fell through. And so I was finishing up my classes. So I was like 19 at the time when I first started doing training for teaching English as a second language. I was starting as a co-op in high school for just teaching and so on and so forth. And so it was when I was an English teacher, not a math teacher. I feel like I did this the last time we spoke too, where I'm trying to do the math.
Yeah.
I think 21, 20 was when I finished, I believe, the training. And then, so 21 was, oddly enough, I was like trying and looking, and it was an opportunity arose, and I was like, everything is in Korea. And I thought, maybe this is meant to be, because one of my childhood friends, it was her birthday yesterday, actually, that I grew up with, she had written in my yearbook, my high school yearbook, one day when we go to Korea to teach English, graduating, there were these jobs in Korea. And I was like, you know what? How fantastic. I can do that, since I can't, lock it down to go to Costa Rica or Guatemala. I'm going to do that. And I was offered a position on, I believe it was like a Friday. And then next Saturday, I was leaving to go in a span of a week. And it was so fast. This I do remember telling you. And then later, Kevin, the gentleman that had been like recruiting and everything, I have a very crazy memory. So I remember names and everything. He said that the job had been between myself and another person. Her name was Esmarie from South Africa. And he said, but we seemed so dynamic that he's like, we think you guys would be fantastic to work together, to be at the school. And so they hired us both. And then her and I became roommates and so on there. There were some complications with that job, like while I was there, with like all of the things for visas and everything else. It was a little bit crazy, but that was my first experience. And I remember at first, like, people just kind of being, you're actually going to do this. Like, we thought you just kind of talked about this and that you were like saying you wanted to, but you're seriously going to go and do this. And I think I was underestimated, not in a bad way, but I think underestimated because I'd always seemed kind of like, oh, she says she's going to do it, but maybe she won't, because she's a daddy's girl and we don't know how far away she can actually go. So to go from one side of the world to the complete opposite in a week's notice. And then after that, when I got back and just like full force to finish schooling and everything, it was very competitive to try and get into the programs back home in Halifax. And I remember just being devastated that I couldn't get into the teacher education program, which was so small. And I was like, but I know I can do this. And to me, and this is something that I'm talking with my son now about, and that I feel is difficult for other, I don't want to say kids, because I know they're young adults, but when they're going out and, finishing school and so on, and they're, hey, go right into college or go right into this. I think it is so important for them to have those opportunities to, work practicums, practice and application of what they're looking into, because it truly gives you an idea. Can you do this? Do you want to do this? Are you passionate about it? And that to me is what sealed the deal. That to me was what sealed it, that I want to be teaching. I like teaching English as a second language. I'm capable of doing this. I have what it takes to do this. I want to keep doing this. And that's how it kept going from there.
I love that. I want you to speak a bit more about, the diversity, the culture of while you were in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Speak about, the language and everything like that. Yeah.
Okay, well, this is something I will have to, I usually have a little bracelet on that says stay focused, because I have to snap it to keep me from just going off the rails. So I went back a second time to Korea, and excitedly enough, that's when my cousin was there. I met my husband in Korea. He was there with the military. I just think that for me, having Korea be the first country that like I got to go to and experience another culture was terrifying when I was 20, 21. It was scary at that time, but I just remember overwhelmingly being this naive, kind of ignorant, not ignorant like I don't care, but ignorant like, how just unaware I was, and just in awe and, scary and everything else, to the point that it was just, it wasn't enough, where I was like, well, I need to go back because it wasn't enough. I didn't get what I needed to get out of that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know how else to explain it. I was just like, I didn't get enough from it. Like, I didn't learn everything I should have learned. I didn't experience everything I should have experienced. I didn't allow myself to gain everything I could have gained while there. And so I wanted to go back. I personally think I love Korea. I adore it. I raised our oldest son was raised, his first language was Korean. He didn't speak English till he was like 4. And the only reason he had to start speaking English was because we had traveled to a different country, being Japan. And that poor child was so confused as to what was going on. We were actually told, you need to completely just immerse him and so on, looking back now. And that was because he had to go to a school on military soil, and he couldn't do ESL. But I think for Korea, the things that really impacted me were just the ethic of education. Some of it I found, oh my gosh, like overwhelming. And I can remember just an example is, so for students that I would teach, the first time I was there was a distinct curricular focus on a speaking class, a writing class, a listening class, and a reading class. They were all compartmentalized. Oh. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I remember for the listening class, in my ignorance, I was kind of like, what are we just going to do for just a listening class? And, when I first got there, I was so surprised, because when they started telling me the students' names, I was like, really? And it was like Sky, Brittany, Christina. Brittany and Christina at the time, this was when Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera had just come out. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, why are these the students' names? And they said, no, they want American names. And I said, why? And they just wanted Americanized names. So they would choose their own names. I thought, okay. And then when we would do some listening and so on, they would say, oh, you can use like Disney movies or Disney stories and so on. So I was really surprised at how kind of, Americanized a lot of it was, and how the students were just eating this up. Like, to them, this was amazing. The students would, I'll take my glasses off. You can't even see eyelashes right now, but they would constantly want to play with my eyelashes, or like touch my arm hair. And they were just like, would question, why is my hair blonde? Like, why do I want it to be this color? Why do I not want it to be another color? They would tell me I was O-line instead of L-line, meaning, teacher, you're fat. Like, you're O-line instead of like nice S-line, just certain things where I was like, oh my gosh, like very funny, just different viewpoints. But I was very shocked at how particular they were with like education, and how certain things needed to be in this order, and they needed to learn. And students would go to school first thing, in the morning type of thing, for perhaps like a tutoring, like a music lesson or something like that. And then they would come to school, their Korean school. Then they would come to us for, depending on the age group, for English school. So if I had a kindergarten class for all day, then I would have my elementary, middle-aged school students for the afternoon. Then they would go to sport. Then they would go to perhaps another music. Then they would go to something else. So the work ethic was very, very strong. And what the students were capable of at a young age was just mind-boggling to me, that I could have students that were 6 American age, or 6, Korean age, 5 American age, and would write paragraphs for me. I could sit there and tell them to write a paragraph and give them a topic, and they could write a full English paragraph. Whereas I knew, for me, looking at, at the time, like students in America that were in kindergarten, I'm like, I don't think if you could tell them to write a paragraph about something, they could, in certain things. So just like the expectations, the idea of family and how they took care of family, take care of family, just the respect struck me. Or as someone who, I want to be able to take care of my father, the poor man just refuses, but one of these days. But just that, where I was like, oh my gosh, I thought that was one of the most beautiful things, is families live generationally together and continue to take care of one another. certain things that have stuck with me. I don't like to do grading in red pen. Like, some of these things are silly, but if you do that and write someone's name in red pen, it means you wish death upon them. Just certain things like that I found impact. Now, here's something that I also think is impactful: eye contact. We know this from other different cultures as well, but eye contact. I found out that it was considered disrespectful for them to be looking at me in the eye. And so I was told, if they stare at you on the subway, look back, it means that they're trying to intimidate you, certain things. Whereas I was like, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to be rude and try to have a power struggle. So there were certain things, as like a 21, year old coming to teach us the first time, that I was scared and naive and always wanted to be like, I don't want to mean disrespect. I'm on someone else's soil. I want to be respectful. But I think just beautiful that the food I absolutely adored. I love the way that they take care of family, the way that they focus on the arts, the way that they focus on music, the way that they focus on creativity for students. I know that there is a lot of academics, but when you're fostering the development of, all these areas and chambers of the brain, it does really make a difference. And I think that was one thing that I wished I could have brought back and really implemented in, the districts and the schools or whatever. Quite honestly, like, many times, I even have spoke to this during my time with my PhD studies and everything else with the professors and different classes, and times that we've discussed, hey, if you could change anything as a leader, what types of things would you bring? And I have spoken to things from Korea, from Japan, from Germany to say, and that is one thing that I have said, going along with this idea. I'm a firm believer in high expectations. And if you're trying to show students what they're capable of, if you know students are capable of, this, and you hold them to this, they can rise up to that. But there's a relationship building and like this kind of confidence and stuff that goes along. You need to show them how they can get there. And I know I had a student in Korea. He was Korean, and they had lived for a while in America. And again, I'm not cutting up the American system. I don't mean it like that at all. But this is just to kind of speak to that. The idea was, you're holding these students, you're showing them like, no, come on, we're going to have these expectations. We know that you can do it. They also have music, they have, athletics, they have all these different things. So it's not just academics. There is a whole child that's, all these different elements of, them being nurtured and developed. And I remember this student and the mother being very concerned because she knew it was kind of competitive. And she was like, but he still, at that time, he still needed me to make kind of like the dots for him to trace for writing and so on. Whereas these other students could write a full paragraph for me. And so I kept going and would scaffold and kind of show him how to do these things. But within a short time, he could write the paragraph. And I was like, if you hold them to the standards, they can do it. And I think that's some things that I would want to bring to America. From Korea, that's something I would want to bring, is that if you're holding these standards, you hold these expectations, we say this, but are we doing it? When we say it, we need to also hold it, and we have to kind of, again, it's the idea of scaffolding, which does go into ESL sometimes, not so much mainstream classrooms sometimes, depending, but you scaffold and you guide them there, and then you take the scaffolds away. But holding them to those high expectations and believing in them and showing them that they can do it, and then they do it. And I think that was something that I thought was amazing. They have a strong support system. And I believe all those things together made a huge difference. It was strong family support systems, these strong beliefs in academics, the importance of what you can do, but not just, I know it's like, go be successful and go do everything else, but it's also take very good care of your family. And I believe those two things together was something that I truly loved from that country.
And I definitely agree with you that those are definitely important facts. But so that leads me into another question. I mean, perfect setup for it. So based on these experiences, your research, what are some of the challenges that administrators and teachers of ELs face, and how can universities and educational institutions, K through 12 institutions and universities, like, how can they better support teachers? Like how can administrators do this, or how can teachers help their students? Like what are some things that can be looked at from learning from abroad and learning from these experiences?
I have some perfect examples. I was extremely fortunate to work with an ESOL program. It was an ESOL bilingual migrant program in St. Louis through a very large school district there. The director of that program, to this day, I don't know that I've ever met someone as intelligent, educated, motivated, and just focused on trying to ensure that students, ELLs, migrant students, refugee students can succeed, and putting the pieces in place to set that up, not just for the students, but for the families as well. And it is, as you mentioned, I love the way that you phrased that question, because it is a organizational system that needs to put these pieces together to help this be successful. If looking at it from the initial preparation point, you think of teachers, for example, and what they need in order to teach ELLs. Through university, when you become, teacher preparation programs, they might require maybe one class that talks to you and teaches you, hey, here's some strategies if you're teaching English language learners. And then that's pretty much it. For administrators, there might be a section within perhaps a curriculum class that may include something about that. But that is pretty much as far as it goes. However, if you look at different areas, you will see that populations, enrollment, and so on and so forth are diverse depending on which areas you're going to. Whether oftentimes people will look at it and say, oh, it's in urban areas or it's this or that. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. But regardless, the strategies, the application, the pedagogy that can be used for supporting ELLs work and help students that are native English speakers as well. And in fact, the way that English language learners, when they are, going through the process of being tested and going through each year to have no longer be categorized as limited English proficient. So when they are categorized as being English proficient, the assessment that they have to take, a number of native English speakers, including administrators, teachers, professors, would probably struggle with that examination. It's extremely rigorous and difficult, and it requires a level of academic language that is beyond what is usually taught in your everyday mainstream curriculum. So to prepare, I would say everybody needs to be provided with instructional strategies and methodologies that can support them. I know for myself, I support, it's called Sheltered Instruction Observational Protocol. I'm not trying to do like an ad or anything like that, I swear. But this is what I had utilized. This is what I had practiced myself. Fortunately, this was also what was promoted within the district that I had worked. I'm very glad to say that the St. Louis University, I've talked frequently with my own advisory panel and the department chair for the program that I am in, and she is also very fond of this instructional model as well. The research behind it is astounding. I've done research on it myself, and I did trainings and coaching, and was able to support another that was training teachers in the district as well with coaching. And what I can tell you is, even when doing a comparison between teachers who are the English language learner specific ESOL teachers or general education teachers that had ELL students in their class, when doing comparisons of the teachers that were implementing this program with coaching that goes along with it to support them as they implement in teaching using these strategies in the classroom, the students did better, the teachers felt more confident, and when they had the coaching to go along with it, they were implementing with a higher level of fidelity, as opposed to those that were not receiving coaching and so on. The students that are able to attain English language proficiency at a faster rate, it makes a difference when students are able to have these systems in the classroom where, hey, background is being built up. They're able to have connections being made, because even if students aren't completely fluent in English, in learning, having content being delivered to them, it does not mean that they haven't had that content delivered to them in a different language before, their native language, or even a second language or third language, because sometimes they're multilingual and not just, have one home language. They might have spoken many. So they can transfer those skills over. They can transfer that over. They just need to understand. Having systems in place in the classroom to have students understand ways that they can make it comprehensible, to understand what they're learning, to have all of the teachers understand, to have the administrators on board, so that you have like a whole system of fidelity in place. So not just the English specific ESOL teachers are the ones implementing this, but all teachers are implementing this in the classroom. And it has also been shown to be beneficial to students that are not ELLs. In terms of having experience abroad, I personally believe, and I've seen this from teachers that I've spoken with that have taught overseas as well. And then when you speak to other teachers that have taught abroad and then come back, it does add an additional element to making that content comprehensible, having another layer of understanding about, what I need to do in class to make sure students have more access to information, to have more access to what is being delivered, that I'm not just keeping things surface level in terms of even kind of cultural assumptions that are being made. Because once you have experienced being somewhere else where your language isn't the primary language being spoken and you're expected to understand what's going on and keep up with this kind of fast-paced situation, then you have a whole different level of understanding of what the students are experiencing. And I think that makes it a little bit easier for teachers to say, okay, well, hold on, and then put themselves in the place of students when creating those plans or activities or supplements, accommodations, modifications, or whatnot. And from teachers that I have worked with, those are typically the situations where not only are they excited to speak with students about their experiences overseas, make these connections with students who maybe are from the countries where they have traveled, have taught, or have just been there. It creates this connection, just a different layer to relationship building, a level of kind of understanding, respect, and then not just keeping it surface level and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Superficial, when respecting and bringing, an appreciation for culture and language into the classroom. I think it really does add to the overall experience in supporting the development of language and the overall experience and respect and the value for these students, and the gift that they have of having these multiple languages and how that should be used to their advantage.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I love that. And so this continues. Like I said, you're leading me into these great questions. So is there like any, so throughout your travels, I mean, do you think there's any specific countries or regions that like really hold international learning to a high standard that maybe in the U.S. that we can model, and look at their valuable insights and their approaches to teaching L's and teaching their administrators and their everybody in the whole organization. Like I said, it starts from up top. It starts from our administrators really understanding that international organization and how it can really be brought into the classroom and teaching our L students. So I was curious, if there's any sort of model out there that maybe we can look at. Is there anything that you're aware of or something that you've heard?
Well, what I would say, so something that's interesting. So I know, for example, with my own university that I work with, that I'm doing my doctorate through, they have campuses, they work with Cyprus, they have campuses in Madrid, so doing international programs. So we have a great number of students that we bring in, from all over. We have a fantastic international program there. There are a few students actually that I was taking classes with that were doing their dissertation actually on the experiences of those international students and whether they put the program to use that is provided for international students, to support them through that learning process. The one thing that I would say, so learning even from between Japan and Korea, international study is taken quite seriously. It's usually students, as I've known situations where students that were as young as like 11, 10, 11 would go and travel abroad, so to America or Canada, to have international experiences to learn abroad, to enhance their English language speaking, to give them a kind of an idea of what it's like in different countries, and vice versa. And so they do frame that around trying to give those experiences back and forth, where you're kind of doing like a dual, students will come here and vice versa. I know they do that through the University of Hawaii as well, where they have like a dual system, and that's with Japan and South Korea as well. So I do know that they, in Asia, there is quite a bit where, from the standpoint of like international high school and so on, there is a preparation where it is encouraged for, there's students that go internationally for high school and so on, and then back and forth. With the one thing that I will say is, even in Germany, and I know they do things differently, but I know even in Germany, they have different tracks of how they do schooling there. I think I'm trying to remember if you and I were talking about that.
We were,
and,
yeah.
I was going to say, I think that was you.
Yeah, I have an acquaintance that I know there that,
yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And so I know, talking there, so our dear friends, their son, so while we were living there, their son was able to go off to do his apprenticeship from the age of 15.
Right.
So from the age of 15, he was going off and going to what I would have seen as like, college, where you're going to school for college and you're doing your apprenticeship to learn what you're going to be doing for your career. So they do have it set up where it's very hands-on. You're learning from the get-go to prepare you for your careers and so on. And also, depending on certain programs, you can be going for free, and also having international systems in place. Now, what I will say about Finland, I have not lived in Finland. However, I have the teachers that I had taught, a teacher that I had taught with in Korea. She and her has taken her family and they moved to Finland. And this is something that I did some research on, and I did some study with during my master's degree, and because I was trying to compare differences between different countries and the way they do schooling and so on. And it was seeing there the way in which they kind of hold teachers to this like higher standard, like comparable to doctors and so on. And education is essentially free, and they have kindergarten for all. And internationally, they had students coming, exchange programs and so on and so forth. Internationally, you can go there. But one thing that had been mentioned was that the difference in how they do schooling there, that I would say would be important for America, is the idea of delving into learning. And as opposed to trying to meet as many standards as possible, and these standardized tests and so on, is that they actually focus more on the depth of how well students are learning the content and concepts. And I feel like there are times, this is something that I had seen in, Korea and Japan, where, sometimes they were like, try to learn this, but they would learn it well and they would know it. And it was a stressful thing in the sense that they're like, I need to know this. I actually need to know this. And it's almost like this urgency of, I need to know this and understand it. And even in apply it. And in Finland, it was, they said that in terms of standardized tests and so on, it's just not how they really do things. They actually do less in terms of standards. It's more, we learn these concepts and delve very deep into it. And then the students do this application, hands-on engagement with what they're learning.
So they're more like project-based learning, right?
Yes. I am seeing more of this going on, more project-based learning. I'm seeing this actually at my son's school here in Hawaii. But this is a mixture of these different things together. And the one huge thing I would say is the practice and application. It's the practice and application and the showing it. We can look back and say, like, these levels of learning, when do you see the levels of learning?
Now, I mean,
the hierarchy of learning. That's it.
So the project-based learning, I'm a full advocate for it. I mean, I do it in my classroom daily.
Mm-hmm.
But also, though, do you think that a society such as Korea, South Korea, or Finland, since it's a homogeneous society, do you think that plays a big role in their education as well, positively or negatively?
I mean, I feel that because it is, I think the difference, I will say this. I know that in Germany, in Finland, I do feel like in Europe, I can only speak to where I've been, so I'm going to take that generalization back. In Germany, I feel like, education is seen as, it's important. It is, it's so hands-on. Everything is hands-on. It is not this kind of, it's not rushed. It's the making sure the depth of understanding is there. And I feel because it's almost like a universal understanding, same as Finland, this kind of universal understanding. I feel that that is something that makes a difference. I think that because it doesn't, and I might be wrong, it doesn't seem like it's a big political thing. It's not considered handled politically a lot of the times. It's seen as, this is education. It is important. It's detrimental. It's for the well-being of our children. Children are our future. And what do we need to do to ensure, that we are putting the right things in place? And again, I am no expert by any means on any of this, but just from my experiences, what I had seen in my time in these different spots in Korea, like I said, taken extremely seriously. A lot of time and effort is put into it from the standpoint of, the parents and so on. But again, it's like this, it's a universal kind of understanding where it doesn't seem like you aren't arguing and fighting against it. It's not a society fighting against those that are providing the education. And I think that there's a difference that I see in like almost like the view and the attitude and the approach and perspective of education when you're talking about it in some of those other countries. When you're here, it seems like it can cause such an argument when you talk about education here. You talk about supporting teachers, or you talk about we need funds for education, and it causes why do we need funds for education type thing? Well, why should money go to this, or why should money go to that? And I think in some of these other, spots that I have been at and had the honor of, being able to provide education, it doesn't seem like there's the same, it just doesn't seem that there is the same level of resistance. And I think that is because there is a universal understanding that this is what's going to keep us going and keep us elevated.
So then that leads me to, how can international experiences and cross-cultural learning, contribute to, professional development and cultural competence for teachers and educators abroad, like what and also too, like what strategies from learning from those experiences can we use here back in the US or anywhere where we're looking for international experience to really teach us?
I really think that it would be beneficial for whether it's university. I think it's wonderful if we could have, leaders in university, those in, and I'll only speak to education programs because that's the only area that I'm in, but those that are developing the programs, those that are developing the systems that are in place, those that are, developing our systems in school districts and so on. I think it would be very important to travel and to look at some of these other systems and see what is working. I think too much time is spent on what is not working. And when you focus so much on what is not working, you're just going to keep finding more of what's not working. And I'm guilty of this constantly of going, what's going wrong? What's wrong? And then try to focus on, okay, well, what went right? And then what were the steps or actions that were taken in order to lead that to being what's right? I feel like going to these international locations, looking at those systems, looking at the organizational systems, look at the breakdown structures of how planning takes place, whether it's budgetary analysis, whether it's the systems of scheduling, whether it's a system of determining the learning targets, the system of choosing curricular materials, and how all of these things combine and are aligned. It's looking at these different spots and then seeing, okay, how has that led to the success there? And whether it's creating a matrix to compare and then see what do we have in common, what do we not have in common, what do they have in common, what are some elements that we could actually take from there and transfer over to our own context. So where are we right now? Where do we want to be? What do we need to do to get to where we want to be? And what can we take from these different places? What could we implement? I would honestly say that there are things just from my study that I'm doing right now that I'm looking at, and I can't speak to it right now, but I cannot wait till I can speak to it, where I'm going, oh my gosh, I've received so many answers that I'm looking at going, so many people have been saying, this is what would help, this is what would make a difference, this is what would make a difference. But then the response they're getting from exactly what you're asking about, what do these people need to see, are like, no, that won't work, that can't work, that can't work. And there's a spot right now where this is working, it's implemented, and it's working. And I'm going, but it can work. And here's testament that it can. I think that it is choosing something and sticking to something. And maybe it doesn't need to be universal across the whole country. I'm not saying that, but I would say that when you can't triangulate everything that you have, that you're putting together, and you don't have this kind of coherence and alignment between all of these different elements that are supposed to come together to make a system work, and then you still aren't getting the outcomes that you want to get, that's when you have to look and say, okay, well, what do we need to put together to make our system function the way we want? And I would say we need maybe less standards, maybe do more of this hands-on, more of this practicum, more of this application, give the students the opportunity to practice what they're learning, make it work, because they're going to have to do that when they go, out into the world, and they have to actually do it to show what they know. They have to actually apply it and show us, okay, now you put this to practice. Or universities, I feel like they need to see, hey, if we're going to be teaching in the realm of ELLs, what is it like to be in that situation? What do we need to know what it's like to be in the situation? How can we almost, empathize or understand from that standpoint? It's going and getting these different viewpoints, picking them up and bringing them back, and having that training. I don't think you can be a leader and lead all these people and not understand kind of the methodology. So whether it's the pedagogy that's going in, they also need to be supportive and be understanding and know how to evaluate. And then having a system of evaluation that is actually going through the correct cycle every time.
I love that. I mean, that leads me to the final question. I mean, you kind of touched on it already. So for administrators, for educators, in looking for these opportunities in international education and bringing it back home, becoming a global citizen, so to speak, and teaching L students, what like sole advice do you have for pursuing these opportunities? What are some, like, just step by step, or maybe something that could really get it going?
I truly believe that at the university level, something that I think would be amazing is, I feel like the sources and resources are almost already there. It's just a matter of getting some collaboration and going between departments. If there are teacher preparatory programs, if there are educational leader preparatory programs in place in universities, and then you have universities that typically also already have international programs that are in place. If they have student exchange programs that are already in place, you have the educational leader and the teachers that have to go do internships. If there are opportunities for leaders and teachers, whether it be during, and I know this isn't feasible for everybody, obviously we have life responsibilities and so on and so forth. However, whether it be, and if it had to be research, fine, but if there are opportunities to provide, even if it's a short time, internships, opportunities to go overseas, opportunities for the educational leaders or teachers to connect and collaborate with the international programs, with the diversity and equity departments, for trips, visits, internships to be done and achieved by going abroad for those that are able to capitalize on those opportunities. I think that would be fantastic. I think that would be something that should really be looked into, because you're, losing opportunities. Many universities already have affiliations and partnerships with other universities abroad. So if there was a way to create systems between the two, doing sort of exchanges, if I think this is something that should be potentially looked into. Conferences, if there's conferences that are going on in different countries, if there's a way for districts to provide opportunity and experiences for their leaders, for teachers to be able to go and attend. I think that these are things that need to be considered, but especially at the initial stage of preparation as an educational leader, for preparation as a teacher, for those that are able to, to do that. I think this would be something that would be really beneficial in the departments and systems that are already in place in the universities. Could try to initiate by working together and seeing if that is something available to then further support their own students, their own teachers, their own up and coming educational leaders, so that they could have these experiences to then bring back. So further research, so that when they go into the field, they're able to bring that experience with them and then start with that experience under their belt, instead of, waiting until far afterwards and then trying to, retrain or rethink and make sense of all of that. I think it would be a fantastic opportunity.
I think so too. I mean, even that carries through to K through 12 education as well.
Yes.
Having these opportunities for teachers, like
Mm-hmm.
you said, through conferences or opportunities actually at the school district. It goes
Correct.
hand in hand to really get the community together in regarding learning abroad. It's just
I
bringing it
agree.
into the classroom is what we need the most. So so
Absolutely.
so Amanda, I really appreciate your time very much. Like I
Thank
said,
you.
you're my favorite guest and first guest for Teaching Beyond Borders in this podcast, Global Learning Journeys, Enriching Educators Through Learning Abroad. So, of course, I'm going to have you back on a future podcast and future opportunities to
I'll be happy to
discuss
be
what,
here.
yeah, to discuss what other leaders in the field, such as yourself. And that's it. Very happy to have you.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. You are fantastic, wonderful. I'm so thankful that you're doing this and gaining perspectives from others to share with everybody else, and to encourage them to experience teaching and traveling abroad and bringing this experience back to enhance their own experiences here in the classroom. So thank you for the work that you do and for sharing with everybody else as well.
Oh, thank you. All right.